Hey, what is up, guys? On my way to jiu-jitsu training. I've been off the training for about 4 weeks because I ripped up my Achilles tendon, tore a bit of the tendon, and I tell you, that is a real gruesome injury. I was hobbling around and walking with a cane, for a while, and last week I went for a private lesson, and just to kind of get back into it, and this week I'm going for another private, and then in a couple of weeks time I'll be back into the class. I love training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and one of the reasons that I really feel that it's a validated martial art, unlike many other systems, is because you have to learn to be able to do the techniques that you're working on while working with a resisting opponent. So, if you look at a lot of martial arts systems, like a lot of the strip mall karate clubs and things like that, they don't really do that. In other words, they can make anything work with the right complying opponent. And it's just really important to kind of understand that concept, because we need to understand how this relates to our base plane, because there's a big relationship here. I'm not just, off on a talk about jiu-jitsu. This is all coming back to the way you develop your playing, because one of the most common questions that I get is, hey, I've been practicing these arpeggios and scales, and I'm just waiting for the day when I can be told how to apply any of this stuff, because most base students' reality when they practice is that they are sitting in their bedroom playing, maybe with a metronome or a drum machine or on their own, and they're just running the scales up and down their fretboard. And it's really important to understand that most guys, even if they're playing with a drum machine or a metronome, most bass students that I've come across have very little understanding of form. So form is an essential ingredient in the understanding of adding resistance to what you learn. Because if you are not adhering to a form, then you can just be arbitrarily playing anything. And it doesn't matter if a metronome or a drum machine is clicking or beating in the background, because you're just going to be 100% unaware of what's going on. And then if you ever get a chance to actually play in a band with other musicians, you'll 9 times out of 10 have to rely on the drummer giving you copious cues to understand where you are. I know this sounds familiar for probably the majority of the people who are watching this, and it's really very prolific within the community of bass players. They don't really know this. Even on a professional level, this is the dirty little secret that so many people don't get. A lot of students think guys who are flying the banner of being a professional are somehow better than them. And many times they're actually not. So, and it depends what they're playing as well. It depends what they're making music on. I've always said, if you're studying with a teacher who his whole career was based on playing in a sort of fourth-rate Holiday Inn lounge act, or playing on a lounge band on a ship or something, 9 times out of 10, that guy isn't really going to be that great. And he isn't going to be able to guide a student based on that experience. Okay, maybe based on something else, but not based on that. And that needs to be addressed, because there's a lot of people out there on the internet who are trying to kind of sell you a bunch of snake oil. And of course, you know, it might be short-term gains, but it won't be long-term for those guys. And the main thing, it won't be long-term for their students. The students get screwed the most. So it's really important to understand that. So if you think about, like, you know, the Garden Variety Karate Kid Club, where they break the boards, and a lot of those boards are bought to break. And you know, the guys doing death touches, that's another thing, those systems that do death touches. It's a lot of it is just group think hypnosis, to where, you know, they're in that group long enough and they're told when that master touches you on the shoulder, you're gonna fall over, and you do it. And this is really another important thing about bass players who are following guys who seem to them to be these like really happening guys, but have never played with anyone of any repute. And, you know, they have like 500,000 to 1 million followers, and they're like unknown people. Like nobody in their vicinity ever really knew about them. They were only ever had kind of a social media presence on the internet. And suddenly they have 500,000 followers. Believe me, you have to understand, when you see that, that is bullshit. That is not real. I don't care what anyone says, it is false. If you look at Sting's YouTube channel, okay? This is a really good indication of this. Now Sting, multi-million selling artist for years and years, was in the police. He has so many fans. He has 790,000 followers on YouTube. Now if you match that up against some Jake Leg, who has, you know, no background, and in the area that he comes from, he's not known for his playing, but people internationally across waters won't know that. So it's easy to kind of cover that with, oh, I was just a faceless session guy and blah, 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 blah. It's all crap. And, you know, they might have done a few gigs or done some stuff, but, you know, just look at those numbers. The other thing that you got to look at the numbers for are what music manufacturers sell with bass guitars and amps. And believe me, if you know, I can't divulge this information because I work closely with companies like Warwick, with Ike, and also with a lot of other companies that I have worked with in the past, and also that I know the insiders for those companies. Huge companies, big companies. And they are not selling these massive, massive numbers that equate to some unknown guy getting 500,000 followers on YouTube, okay? You might ask how they got them. They bought them, or they bought the majority of them. It's very easy to do. Just Google it. Just Google that idea. I mean, there was a big article I read the other day on how Kim Kardashian has bought like millions of her followers. Okay, now she's gonna have some anyway, right? And she's probably gonna have, you know, at least 1 million people that are legit, that are following her at one time or another. But it was interesting, that article that I read, of how, you know, the people who market her would just buy over the odds and subscribers. So people who would then pass by her channel would say, ooh, you know, she has like 6 million followers. I've got to follow her myself, because people love to join groups and be led off the mountaintop. So that's just a little food for thought. So yeah, so if we get back to those death touch karate schools, and I'm not talking about there are some hardcore karate clubs. If you ever studied a system or heard of a system called Kokushinkai karate, those guys are bad asses. I mean, you know, they really fight, and you'd never want to be hit by one of those. As a matter of fact, I got a great story. A friend of mine who is in the British military was doing, and he was a student of mine as well. He was a martial arts student of mine at the time. And he worked for a company called Redman, and Redman was a company that did protective training gear for police officers, especially when they did their baton training, or baton if you're listening from the States. And it was like real padded, like chest guards and thigh guards and shin guards and helmets. And so they could go in and not go 100%, but at least go in with some kind of ferocity and train kind of in a realistic way without hurting their opponent. So, and a lot of guys use this for hand-to-hand stuff. So my friend was in a mall doing this demo for Redman, and they were inviting people on stage to fight the guys in the suits to show how it really sort of protected them. And oddly, one of the guys who was in the audience was my bass brother, JJ Brunel, who plays in the band The Stranglers. And JJ is a long-time black belt in Kokushinkai karate. And he's tall, like he's got to be like 6'4", 6'5", something like that. And he gets up, and, you know, he comes up and says to my friend, like, hey, can I go? You know, and my friend said, yeah, get up and go. And JJ dropped this guy, and this guy was a badass too, but he dropped him through the Redman suit with one kick to the thigh. And I remember my friend saying to me that I've never felt a kick that hard. So that goes to show you there are some hardcore karate groups, but generally. So the idea with Jiu-jitsu, or Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, is that when you learn a technique, at the end of the class, you would usually spar in a live environment with a resisting opponent, who is where the objective of that rolling session would be that you only use the technique that you've just used. And you've built it up because you've done some drills, you've done it really slowly, you've done it without resistance, and now you need to put it into having some resistance. So if you got straight on the ground with a guy who was much better than you and would not let you do that technique, then you'd never be able to do it. So there has to be a progression in the way that you roll, so that when you end up at the end of the session, that you've done that technique a couple of times. And it might be that you didn't do it under full resistance, but then that time will come because you might not have been ready that day, depending upon who you are. And that's super important. Now, how does this relate to what we do? Well, it's the same thing. When you learn, let's say you learn an arpeggio pattern, and you play it up and down, and you're not really concerned with how you're playing it, you're just playing it up and down. The way most people do it is they'll play it in one key, and then they'll take a break, and then they'll go and play it in the next key, and then they'll take a break. But what they haven't done is they haven't figured out that within that time that they are playing that arpeggio pattern, is that they're totally unaware of how many bars they've played, or even what time signature they're playing in, and what rhythm that they're actually playing, be it like quarter notes or eighth notes or triplets or 16s. They're just playing, and without that specific awareness attached. And then what they're doing is, after they've played it once in one key, then what happens is that they stop. So they never make a transition to the next key. And so what they're doing is they're being totally unaware that there is any kind of a form present. So this is just a very basic first level. The first layer of adding resistance is doing something like that. Okay? The second layer is starting to explore how you're going to get from one key to the next. So notice that we have what's called different cycles of root movement. You have the cycle of fourths, cycle of fifths, you have the cycle of minor seconds, you then have the cycle of major seconds, and that's going to be 2 cycles. You have cycles of minor thirds, major thirds, and tritones. I talk about these I gave away a bonus on my new book, Chord Tone Mastery for Electric Bass. You can find that right now. I'll link it up over here. It's up at full price, but it comes with a 10-page PDF bonus, which takes you through all those cycles and a bunch of other stuff too. So a lot of people just practice through the cycle of fourths. That's cool, but you want to change that up. So you're now practicing, maybe let's say through the take one of the cycles of minor thirds. We could have C. Say we're taking a minor 7th chord. We have C minor 7, we have E flat minor 7, we have F sharp minor 7, and we have A minor 7. And then we're playing that as a continuous, like maybe 2 bars on each chord for the arpeggio pattern that we're playing, just chord tones. And then you want to move that's only 4 keys, so you've got to keep moving that up by half steps until you reach all the 12 keys, because there's going to be 3 different cycles of minor thirds. One starting from C, one from D flat, one from D, and one from E flat. So that's kind of a very cool way to do that. And then you could start adding all the different cycles, and then you could start mixing chord types. What is the most common progression in jazz is a 2-5-1 progression. Identify what that is. You're taking a minor 7th chord, I'm moving up a 4th or down a 5th, and then I'm going to a dominant 7th chord, and then I'm moving up a 4th or down a 5th with that. So that's moving up through the cycle of fourths. Okay? So very important to understand that just how many tunes are based on a 2-5-1, because you don't have to go straight. Like a lot of guys go straight from practicing where they're totally unaware of any form, totally unaware of any key transitions. They're sloppy, it's broken up, it's bitty, and they're really still struggling, and now they want to play a tune. So they're trying to go from A to Z. They have all those points of the alphabet in between. Those are the progression, the progression of resistance that wants to occur there before you get to the end, before you get to an actual tune. So I'll tell you a story. Before I went to Berkeley, I was jamming with some friends of mine, and we basically got together and jammed just 1-chord jams, rock things. We didn't really know what we were doing at all. But I had done the summer before I went to Berkeley, because I knew I was going. I thought, man, I gotta maybe try to get something together here. I'm just gonna go in completely blind, which I was anyway. It didn't even matter. But I took a music theory course at a local junior college the summer before I went. It didn't really make any difference, but I still did that. And then, because of that junior college, it made me aware of a few things, you know. So we were jamming, had a regular jam going on at this guy's house, and a friend of the guitar player's father had a son who had just got the gig with the Buddy Rich big band, and he had been to Berkeley, and he was in town before he was going to go off with Buddy, and my friend's father organized that guy came over and jammed with us. And he came over and he heard us play, and he could realize, you know, we were just like kids that didn't know what was going on, really. So he put a lead sheet on our music stands, which was tune-up. And, you know, of course, I couldn't read at that time, but I could just about follow maybe a chord progression. And, of course, Tune-Up by Miles Davis is just a series of 2-5-1s moving down in the cycle of major seconds. And that's predominantly the whole tune. So that's a good example, because a lot of guys say, oh, I've got to play a tune. I've got to play a tune. I have to learn this jazz standards. But you can practice a succession of drills that by the time you get to the end, then looking at those jazz standards will not be that big of a mystery, because look at the way standards are constructed. They're constructed with different chord progressions that are moving through various different root motion cycles. Just like tune-up is a good example. Some are a little different, some, you know, are very similar to that. And I remember we tried to play tune-up, and we were just all like, man, this is like, we didn't know what the hell was going on. And the guitar player was trying to solo just using like one scale over the whole thing, and of course he couldn't, because it was changing key. And it was a revelation to us. I mean, we were just like, it was like rolling on the mat with, you know, the first time you roll on the mat with like a blue belt as a white belt in Jiu-jitsu. And it's just like the stuff they're doing is just completely way off what you've been doing. And nothing you do can work. Okay? And many people that experience that going on gigs, they get on a gig and nothing they do can work, and then they just don't know what to do, and they think, yeah, I've got to practice and do this. But the key to your success in all forms of application is that you have to add resistance to what you practice. And this can be done from the point of solo command and mastery, which means it's just you, baby. It's just you at home. Leading up to partner drills. And guess the news. This society we have now, where nobody plays with anyone anymore, has got to end. And if you want to be good, you've got to organize you getting together with like-minded guys. And it can start by you just doing partner playing with you and a drummer, you and a guitar player, and just going through stuff. And hopefully it's somebody who is better than you, so they can advise you along the way. And then you can get a specific idea, like you might just want to concentrate on creating lines with chord tones. So you might play over some standards. All your walking lines are just chord tones, or all your solos are just chord tones. You then might want to add an embellishment, like let's say a scale passing tone, and use a combination of chord tones and scale passing tones. Then add some chromatic approach notes. Now you wouldn't want to do this all in one session, or you won't be successful. This has to be incrementally, but you have to be doing this. When my first year at Berkeley, I couldn't really play with a band successfully, so I would get together with drummers and guitar players or piano players and play duo things for no reason other than for the love of music. People today only get together and play if there's some kind of shitty top 40 gig that they've got booked. And, you know, look at it. That top 40 gig, yeah, it might have made you, like, I don't know, $50 or whatever. But the thing is, the gig was crap. You didn't get anything out of it. And you still play the way you play. So you really want to do it this way. And then build up to maybe getting a third guy for a trio setting. Get another guy for a quartet setting. And I always tell people, because a lot of people say to me, what's your advice for becoming a musician and, you know, trying to get gigs and do something with my music life? And I always say to them, never play a gig for free. Never. But there's a little asterisk that goes with that, which means never play a gig for free unless you have an opportunity to join a community big band. Okay? Because that will be some of the best training that you'll ever get. You'll follow charts. You would be, and it might not, everyone might not even have the skill level to get into an entry-level big band. But sometimes you get lucky, because sometimes these community bands, or like a local college, you know, has a big band, and they don't even have enough students in the school or in the area to fulfill all the chairs. So that's where you'll get, like, you know, guys who are like 65 years old playing in a big band, and, you know, they're just doing it for fun because it just happens to come up. And you might not be able to read that well, but sometimes a chair opens up and people say, well, if you take the charts and you kind of work on it, so it gives you something to work for, and then that experience will be invaluable. Remember, Jocko was a big band bass player. And there's a great story about when Jocko was in Weather Report, because he joined Weather Report, and Alex Acuna was the drummer. And Alex, I don't know how long he lasted, but Alex really wanted to stop going on the road, and he had a lot of opportunity to go to LA and really make it big with the session scene. He had been with Weather Report for a while, so he left. And Zalinol said to Jocko, hey, you know, you're the bass player. Who do you want to play drums? Who would you think would be the best drummer rather, for Weather Report? And Jocko said, you need a big band drummer, because a big band drummer is the only guy who's going to have the intensity to drive this band. And so Peter Erskine was an up-and-coming guy. He was on the road with Maynard Ferguson at that time, and he had played with, I believe, the Stan Kenton Orchestra before that. And he was just a driver, you know. He was just intense and had like this whole vibe about carrying a band. And the drummer, like Buddy Rich, you know. And when you play with a big band as the bass chair, you have to learn how to drive as well. So you have to learn that type of intensity. Loads of great bass players who were originally big band bass players. And Jocko being probably the most famous for electric bass. But, you know, people like Jeff Berlin has played in a load of big bands. Dave Carpenter is no longer with us. He used to play with Alan Holdsworth. He played with Buddy for a while. Lots of guys. Guy I used to come across at Berkeley now and again. Didn't really know him, but he was a great player. Wayne Petzelwater. He played with Buddy. And it's funny, Buddy used to pay damage fees to his bass players, because they were the hardest people that, you know, he was hardest on those guys, the bass players, you know, because he was standing right next to him. So that's kind of it. So the thing is that, again, just closing, the idea of how do you apply things every day you practice something, you have to say to yourself, how am I going to use this on something? Just a little thing. You know, how do I hear these ideas working on, you know, some type of a groove? You can choose the groove. It could be a jazz walking bass line thing. It could be like a funk thing. It could be a rock thing. And this is what you got to do. Now, here's the deal. If it sucks, then that's just a fact of what happened that day. It doesn't define you as a bass player. But if you're aware of the fact that it sucked, you'll be able to change that. And that's very, very important. So you got to learn to live in a non-judgmental world when you're self-assessing your evolution as a musician. So that's the key. It's very simple. And you've also got to be listening to stuff all the time. You have to be aware of what a funk thing sounds like. I've had students that have come to me and I say, what kind of music are you into? And this is really a small minority, but still, I've had guys say to me, yeah, I'm not really into anything. I don't really know what I'm into. It's like, really? You're coming for bass guitar lessons and you don't know what you're into? So you kind of have to have that if you're going to get a start with this thing. So you need to be listening to stuff all the time. And I would suggest listening to as many different styles as you can, so you can just start to understand. And just by the listening, don't buy books on every style of what you can learn. Don't do that. It's a waste of time. Listen to the music. The music is the source. If you then, after listening for a considerable amount of time, buy a book that's related to that style, like for instance my book Killer Finger Funk Grooves, which relates to funk music, then that might make sense. You know, it's like the guy who buys the book on walking bass lines, and you say, well, yeah, well, what jazz bass players are you been listening to, and what have you been checking out? Nothing really. I just thought this book would help me play walking bass lines. Whenever I hear anyone in an interview that says I learned to play walking bass lines from a book, and believe me, I've heard that, okay, you know that guy can't play a walking bass line. You got to learn it from the music, because that's where it comes from. The book might help. The book may help for an organizational point of view, especially my walking bass lines book. But aside from that, don't bother if you're not listening to the stuff, because that's where you make that connection to how can I make this work over something, because you've listened to maybe a tune that had like a sort of pseudo reggae groove, and you said, man, I could copy that feel and I could use these notes. Let me try to do that. Okay, so take that, food for thought today. Big thanks to all the guys who have bought my book, my new book, Chord Tone Mastery for Electric Bass. Unbelievable launch. Over 2 days, I sold over 800 copies. Absolutely amazing. It's online now at the full price. 400 plus pages, over 1,000 exercises on chord tones. Lots of cool things in the book. Very, very cool. So, many thanks for your support. Also, please note that I'm pushing near 10,000 subscribers. And I noticed from my analytics that a lot of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed. But it does help. And, you know, I'm one of those guys that's never going to buy his subscribers. All those are organic people. They're real people. And, you know, so it'd be nice. I think I've got about 9,500 at the moment. So, you know, I only need, you know, about 500 more guys, something like that. So if you can kind of make sure you're subscribed and click the notifications bell, bell rather, so you can get early notifications for everything that I release. That'd be great. So thanks very much. Practice smart, work hard, play creatively. Hubbard out.